President Trump is spending the Thanksgiving holiday at his Florida resort as the White House weighs whether to participate in the impeachment inquiry. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler is scheduling his panel's first hearing next Wednesday. It's part of that phase of the inquiry. Nadler's extended an invitation to the White House. It allows the president to attend the hearing or to send lawyers to be present on his behalf. The White House has not yet signaled whether it will participate. At a rally on Tuesday, the president continued to insist he's been treated unfairly in the inquiry process. Well, meanwhile, a new report from the New York Times revealed the president had known of the whistleblower's complaints about his contacts with Ukraine in late August. Democrats believe that the president's decision to withhold $391 million in aid to Ukraine until September is connected to his request to Ukraine's leader to launch investigations into Joe Biden and the 2016 election. I want to bring in Nancy Cordes in Washington, Weijia Jiang, who's in West Palm Beach, Florida, traveling with the president. Nancy is our CBS News chief congressional correspondent, and Weijia is our CBS News White House correspondent. Okay, Weijia, I want to start with you. We've got these hearings next week. Do we have a sense yet of what extent the White House will be participating in this process, if at all?
Well, the White House has not officially said whether or not they will be participating. We do know that the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler, invited the president himself and the president's attorneys to be at the hearing, and so that is still open. And we also know that a source familiar with the thinking about the legal strategy here says it's really unlikely that there will be a representative from the White House there because it would just legitimize what they believe is an illegitimate scam investigation. These are the lines that we've heard over and over again. But it is interesting that, the White House could just come out and say that. And so far that hasn't happened. Nadler has set a deadline for Sunday evening to let him know whether there will be somebody there at this hearing. So at this point, we're just waiting to see and waiting to hear if the president himself chimes in.
Nancy, Weijia says we're waiting to see how the White House decides to move on this. Let's say they choose not to be involved. How does that affect the process in the Judiciary Committee?
Well, then you've got Republicans stepping up to essentially defend the president, and the Republicans on this Judiciary Committee are going to have no trouble doing that. Believe me, this is a committee where the two sides are used to clashing, even more so than the Intelligence Committee, which you saw over the past couple of weeks as this parade of witnesses came in for public testimony. And so if the president's counsel is not there asking questions, you can be sure that Republicans on the committee will be asking all the same questions that the president's lawyers would have been.
Nancy, how does this work when you compare to the public hearings we saw in the Intel Committee? How will it be different or the same in the Judiciary Committee? How do you compare them?
Well, the Intelligence Committee was more about fact-finding. So that had to do with various witnesses who had either watched or participated in this scheme coming in to tell what they know. In the Judiciary Committee, it's going to be all about looking back at history, looking back at precedent. What kinds of violations have presidents been indicted for in the impeached rather for in the past? Why? How did those processes go? What's the sort of the history of impeachment? What did the founders intend? Those kinds of big questions. And so they'll bring in experts, lawyers, historians to share their view. And so while that, these witnesses will not necessarily be partisan or very controversial, there's going to be, I think, more clashes between members, between Democrats and Republicans than you saw even in the Intelligence Committee, because the stakes are clearly getting higher. They're now discussing what types of articles of impeachment to pursue against this president.
And Weijia, the president held a rally last night in southern Florida. Were there any signals as to whether the White House would change their messaging strategy if they choose to participate in those hearings?
The president's messaging is largely the same, although he does seem to be focusing more on how this could impact him in 2020. He says that this is allowing him to just walk right through the election. And it's something we've heard from the beginning, that the inquiry could possibly help him politically. And now he continues to point to polls that show there is not an appetite for impeachment. And he's right in the sense that, these public hearings have not really moved the needle of public opinion. Even our recent polls show that about 50% are in favor of impeachment, 43% against, but that has remained pretty much the same since October, and that was, of course, before these public hearings where Americans had an opportunity to hear from themselves the witnesses that Democrats are relying on to build their case, and that hasn't made a difference. So what we heard at the rally last night was a continuation of the president, airing grievances about how the entire process is not legitimate, and again saying that this only shows that the Democrats are obsessed with one thing, and it's not getting things accomplished for the American people.
Speaking of that rally, the president had this to say when he was asked, talking about the length of time the impeachment process might take.
I've had Republicans come up to me, "Sir, can we keep this sucker going a little bit longer? We've never seen anything like it with the polls." I said, let's get it over with, but you know what? We're stuck with dealing with very, very sick and corrupt people. That's what it is.
Nancy, is that the sense on Capitol Hill? Do Republicans feel like as long as they can keep the impeachment process going, it's better for them?
I have to tell you, Rena, I have not heard that from a single Republican in the House or the Senate. I have not come across one Republican who is excited about how long this has gone on, or who thinks that this is really great for their side, or frankly, who even really, aside from a handful, really enjoys defending the president on this particular subject. So, no, he's wrong about that. He's also wrong about the polls. The polls actually really haven't changed that much over the course of the last few weeks. The number of Americans who support impeaching and removing this president has stayed about the same. It's inched up in a few polls. But, we haven't seen any indication via polling that this has been great for the president or the Republican Party. And, we haven't seen a lot of polls that show it's great for the Democrats either. But I'm not sure where the president is getting his numbers or which Republicans he's talking to.
And, we mentioned this New York Times story saying that the president knew of the whistleblower complaint before he actually released the aid, the nearly $400 million in military aid to Ukraine. Does that change the timeline of events or the way we look at this whole thing unfolding?
Well, the dates do matter, right? Because the president has made one conversation in particular the centerpiece of his entire defense, and that's a conversation that happened on September the 9th. The EU ambassador Gordon Sondland testified that during this conversation he had with the president, he asked the president what he wanted from Ukraine, and he testified under oath that the president's answer was, "I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. I want nothing. I just want Zelensky, who is the president of Ukraine, to do the right thing." And so we know the president has been using that talking point a lot. In fact, he mentioned it at his rally when it was first out. He read from his handwritten notes about this because it's a point that he wanted to stress. So why does that matter? Because if he had found out about this whistleblower's complaint and he knew there were red flags popping up about why he was withholding the military aid, it means that he knew about it before he declared this to Sondland, and essentially is using his defense back then as his defense now. And so there's another question about when the aid was released on September 11th. Which is just 2 days after that conversation. But I have to tell you, I just got off the phone with a source who is close to the president, and they believe that this reporting actually helps the White House and helps President Trump, because they say, look, if the president knew about this report at the end of August, he would have released the aid sooner, or he would have made these public declarations of no quid pro quo even sooner. But that didn't happen until September 9th and September 11th. So they weren't confirming or denying the date about when President Trump found out about this complaint. But again, they are spinning it in a way that they believe could be positive for President Trump.
And also, Nancy, we know that House Democrats released a new set of transcripts yesterday, including from Mark Sandy, the official from Office of Management and Budget. He had some new details. What did we learn from that?
Well, what we learned, Rena, was that despite this constant White House refrain that the president withheld this military aid, hundreds of millions of dollars worth, to Ukraine because he was worried that other countries weren't paying their fair share, or because he was concerned about corruption in Ukraine and the fact that it had nothing to do with Joe Biden. What we're learning again from this set of transcripts is that those messages were never communicated to folks even in the top echelons of the White House or the Office of Management and Budget, a very high-ranking official at OMB who was responsible for putting the hold on that aid was never told why the hold was being placed. He was only told that the president wanted it. He asked, he was given no answers. And in fact, at one point, top officials at OMB were told, well, we just need to put this hold on now, and then we got to go back and talk to the president about it, sort of implying that folks thought that they'd be able to talk the president out of withholding aid to Ukraine. And so it once again calls into question the rationale that the White House has given publicly for the hold that was placed on this military aid.
I want to thank both of you for joining us. No two women deserve to not be cooking tomorrow, have their feet up and sit in their PJs and stream things that are not political. I want to thank you both. I hope you get that opportunity tomorrow. Nancy,
sounds fabulous. Same to
you. You deserve it, both of you. Nancy
Well, I'll be right back here.
I was thinking that would be the case for you,
Definitely
Weijia.
Nancy. But Nancy definitely gets that break. I mean, every time I look on the television, no matter what time of day, I see Nancy Cortez.
Oh, you guys.
Yes, I'm glad
you
that
guys
you're
are the
getting.
Best.
I know. We can't help it. It's nice. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. We are so grateful for the two of you. Thank you both very, very much. Happy Thanksgiving.
Terrific.